I'm good to start whenever you are. Are you over? Oh.
You just wait the 2 minutes. I'll cut it out.
We'll give you your They want their 57 seconds until 8, so we shall start.
Is it passing or accumulating? Are the 57 seconds passing or accumulating?
Time always accumulates, so we'll get there. Good. Now is anybody not ready? Perfect.
The trading of black flesh marks the birth of modern logistics, the first global movement of commodities, regulated algorithmic regulation, arrangement of bodies and movements, so as to secure the financialization that we witness today in arms sales policy. Logistics has never been merely about the movement of goods, but about the control of flow of movement and touch itself. The nation state serves not as an external actor to check capital's access, but rather an arrangement of governmental interest, and closure in the form of radical touch that would threaten logistics. The world is inseparable from logistics. Code of modernity that Buddhist sociopathic demands an era of code, sanction killing of black and brown bodies, while logistics is commercial. Logistics is the first global movement of commodities, required algorithmic regulation, arrangement of bodies and movements, so as to secure the financialization that we witness today in arms sales policy. The code sutures itself a new kind of war, calling upon the perverse nature of policies of the United States, attorney, and what team modern logistics, commercial logistics, United States military logistics, the most commonly outsourced the commercial firms who make huge profit. The logistics, temporary period of oil, the outsourcing trade was the birth of logistics, a new kind of war, the human species, center of racial capitalism, this trade until the first global movement of mass commodities, financial logistics are intertwined with things, global shipping of truth, the stories, as long as central modern logistics, about social demand, the topographical, jurisdictional model, social access, about logistics, about the controlling the flows, ensuring the flows of much interface of political money, financial elimination of goods and cargo, and the price of consideration of finance in the song. The slave was worker on the line at the same time, so line coming offline into the line R and Tigma requires our mirror into parity mirror. Contingency logistics will always be the white science and the science of being white. Logistics is not just out there, but in here. Debate is a microcosm of the world. The so-called neutrality, fairness, predictability, stasis, clash, and topic education are ideological means of entry in which the protocols are not a negotiation of competing models, but predetermined by logistics. A white being that seeks to fix those that need to be fixed. Limits are not just limits on the topic, but practices of the community. Clashes, debates are refusal to invite certain teams to round robins, policing and falling around black and brown debaters because their arguments are unsafe. Black debaters getting the cops called them because their music is too loud. All prove the unique. This question of the inseparability of the internal debate from debate as activity. White logistics having co-spun linguistic comments to the point where even the thoughts themselves are quantifiable and financialized. The mode of governance constantly internalized and replicate as violent practices, but as ubiquitous as the system sounds, it's always vulnerable to the system glitch. Neural findings that never supposed to happen in movement that cannot be expropriated. Beller and 17, the cognitive which undergone cloning preparation. This overlaps the violation of slave trade. These encroachments of the linguistic common development which are represented in political has been lost. Can political be no one character of the government to publish the expropriation of cognitive roots by capital reduced to scourge production to the machine and quantity of sediment to machines. So operations injustice to reproduce and reproduce planted culture founded upon races of machines must be understood. Information formation, sociology, positive programs, theories and conditions, churches, operation, everyday conscious thought, render quantifiable computer on program. However, it's a mistake to imagine the impact of technology flows only one direction. Technical form emergence, outlets, the darkness, the struggle from the wind, the oppressed outflank domination persists in living realization, vessel, personal, corporal, inscription, the code works less, and we work with about the micro levels of struggle, organization, no existing political discourse, the Persian rising, current concepts, and thoughts, self-self, server ideas themselves become operators, fully functions, and the matrix of information works that transfer our climates, all mental and neural process will sending them to interval dreams, financial to everyday life, everyone forced to continue to input information, in order to manage the mortality versus what you're dealing with, the overcutting of bodies, the practices, the absorption of political energy by charging of leadership, politics, and policy are today always on the side of the state, and the state is the side of capital. The adjudication of this internal debate is no different than logistical enforcement as arms sales policy is corrective, but in this course, the possibility of a possibility, one that problematizes the need for policy, one that is misimagined and yet disimagined. Echo that asks the question, what would happen if the fleeting moment anti-state terror were socialized against the static security? Thus, we affirm militant preservation. As Beller reminds us, it is a mistake to imagine logistics flows only in one direction. Military preservation is the unsettling feeling, the opposite flow. One that begins in the moment sociopoiesis that harnesses the energy of sociality against a perversive fixation of policy, refusing to find corrective and violence, such a white being in favor of a new feeling of haptic relationality. We rather open ourselves to the possibility of possibilities when we rather participants as feelings and uncommon as we utter common capacity to feel through others, for others to feel through you, for you to feel them feeling you. This is the feel of insurgency, a feel that refused to be regulated under the jurisdictional doctrines of DCS and FMs that dictate logistics and its practices. The fugitive feeling of endurance felt by those in the hold them for a horror of the first logistical cells. thus having individuation that happens to be the force of my position, our thoughts policy without understanding policy as a corrective in debate. It's in our incompleteness and our apolitical project and kinds us towards one another. This is the apositionality of being together, yet against the very institutions that seek political and logistical control. That's Melvin. And 60 performed event repeated with each reading can be stated about industriality works on doing a trade chart, logic intervention, and the world's accessibility of resistance policy, the neighbor political control command takes the Dipiazza discourse or command of cultural social reduction by diagnosis, the correctness for those who represent the need of improvement in hard capitalist planning to a policy of against military motivation to escape the procedural policy men and hard cap officers supposed to assist there's nothing wrong with logistics counterize bodies, the objects affects information to logistics coordinating mode chemicals have to love capacity for others to feel you for you to feel the field use sociopolitical imagination and for the novelists out of the shibity and beyond the university and have ruins castaways of fusions of the apes ceremony being together the reducer sense of institutions say where the forms of our parents and social being creativity is determined through social action context sexuality can be made anti to the powers to try to inhabit social being otherwise reminding us that radical change requires structure. What does it mean to be militant? Shakaitis and Graeber tells us the imminent process of resistance, one that is a source for social insurgency among the people who refuse to be passive victims of or willing participants in an oppressive system. The requirement that in the face of logistics we have no choice but to analyze, strategize, and act on the surrounding social conditions. Movements up to abstractions or overloading circuit points on the global sphere about ongoing resistance to having our thoughts, actions, provocation, and explorations. Our model of debate seeks to ascend to new levels of understanding imminent process of resistance that unleash beautiful insurgency from the ground up. This is work without a beginning, without an end, and constant planning, as opposed to policy that we take with us wherever we go. Shakaitis and Graeber 7 investigations, which research and possibility for political action. The work of most investigations, multiple expanding attacks of new levels of understanding. Most investigation discovered new possibilities for the present journey. Dead into joke uncertainty, how we help compile with the essence of adaptation when we read or when we read the beginnings of the word of the face of mutilation of human life, theoretical. In fact, opposition, negative struggle for right thought is born, the struggle is only struggle, is identity, true evolution, knowledge would have to be a practical form of knowledge of their own traditions, to be better knowledge of truth. True process for your debates in Latin America, arguments to turn to a very particular question of religious issues, but all Baptiste or Chavez is Bolivarian revolution. We act in abolition not for a ground to stand on, but the groundations beyond standing through the nautical event marked the birth of logistical sovereignty that overcodes the present, accompanied by subversive potential as it simultaneously spawned a massive, subterranean, ethereal, undercommon threat to the individuation of modern life. It's in these sumptuous tangles that individuals embrace the ability to find each other, to move together, to break the rule of Newtonian time and space disorder, and legislate new time and space of disorder, to gather stranded into refuge together. Why not absorb the rhythm of unsanctioned movement? Why not make all the wrong moves as the impose the mandatory movement and improvement upon us? Why not become the jaywalker, constructive obstruction, prancing across the production line that itches to speed into infinity? Why not unplug the system that seeks to siphon our demonic energy to demand a production? Why not feel the frictional spark of fleshly disassembly burning down access with our excess? This is brokenness, this is sociality of the antisocial, and we're here to fuck up your liberal dream. But in Hardy 15, when we move, we assemble just a new one, and legislative council assemble, moves us with them, moves through us, moves to access, to undercommon effectively, we make access, burn the line, undone, and the undoing of every single part of our news, assembly, general assembly, or disassembly, off the line, online, we call them, we speak, our undoing and undoing. Ain't the same as just to move wrong or not to move is now is obstruction of the logistics or obstacle of progress and to move wrong or not to move is sabotage. They say attack on the step line is subversion of logistics or capital to move wrong is identity access capital to move wrong is to have our own thing of not having jaywalker becomes no longer a rube in the way logistics is saboteur or terrorist a demon. Jaywalker is disassembly for itself, so temperature is punched by death in a world. At the time space logic found in the bath movement is total access improvement drives us towards total value makes us going produce compels us to get online to work more to work harder. We finally invite our to exercise our right to individuality then we may improve the production line running through our liberal dreams continues to improve it to the metric of uplift those who keep moving wrong are the ones who hold everyone back, fucking up the production line supposed to improve us all. They like being incomplete and incomplete one another. Incompleteness is said to be a bad habit, they're said to be sketchy, they lack coordinate, they're uncoordinated, they're inself-sufficient. Incompleteness is what gives us hope, is our incompleteness inclined towards one another. The more we think of ourselves as finished whole individual, the more we cannot love or be loved. Love is the undercommon self-defense of being incomplete. We need to be intact in our defense. We love that we are complete only in plain incompletions, which they would have undone. We do mind working because we do mind dying.
Good.
Yeah.
First question, the Wednesday starts with the training of black flesh marks the birth of modern logistics.
Yes.
What is flesh?
We think that flesh is what the body is made.
Wait, so flesh is the body?
Yeah.
Okay, the Muehlman evidence is in the context of rereading Moten Hardy's book, The Undercommons. So if it's just about rereading the book, then why is debating necessary?
So the Mehlman evidence does not only says that it's just about rereading, but it's a question of our orientation towards those things. We think that this is coupled with the Shakaitis and Graeber evidence.
Where do you think the card supports the debating portion of that?
Well, we've coupled it with the Shakaitis and Graeber evidence to make a coherent argument.
The card itself just says we need to reread the undercommons.
Well, it says that reading those undercommons and then positioning ourselves towards a mode of politics is good. We think that that positioning and those modes of politics are discussing the intricacies of militant strategies. The Shakaitis and Graeber evidence defends this and says that when we investigate those militant strategies, it allows us to come to the conclusion of which one is best, but also allows us to be anti-logistical, which resolves the social energy.
Is there a reason the YC endorses militant preservation, or is it just endorsing for the sake of endorsing?
Well, we think militant preservation is a good strategy for black and brown debaters.
Why? Is there
Well,
a reason?
yeah, so we think that it creates social energy through the tracing of the code.
Okay,
which
Milton
are-
and Harney say it's affirmation for the sake of affirmation without a beginning or an ending.
So there is
if
no-
that is true,
wait.
then why? Is there a reason? That's my question.
I'll
Is there a
explain.
beginning or-
So the argument about Moden and Harney is that that was essentially a Telos bad argument. That is, there's no reason for why we should come together. I.e., there's no reason for why we should be in debt to each other. That social
Okay, so-
energy concept, there's no reason for the social energy. There's no reason we need or political project that is attached to that social
So
energy.
you just said we don't need social energy. There's no reason we need it.
No, it's
And
that
why-
social energy is good, but there's no end goal of the social energy.
Okay, then why do you say there's a race war?
We didn't say there's a race war.
You don't think there's a race war?
No.
Okay. What constitutes Milton preservation?
Well, we think military preservation is hapticality. Obviously, there's no threshold for loving each other enough or touching each other enough, but we think sociality is sort of an affectual relation. There's a uniqueness claim that affect is inevitable. There's always affect.
Well,
there's
okay.
always how we relate to each other.
So
It's a question.
it's
Okay.
important, the distinction between affect and relationality, and so I think Moden and Harney would contextualize it not as a mode of sort of affectual understanding, but rather relational in the sense that it's not sort of these moments in which we relate, but sort of like the overall sort of feel of mutual indebtedness.
Okay,
it's
So
not a
relations are inevitable. It's a question of how violent
Yeah,
or.
fine. The Shikitis and Graber card cites movements like the DPP of Zapatistas.
Yeah.
What is the actual relationship to those movements?
Well, we think that it cites debates over those two groups. There's no relation between those movements, but we think the debates between those groups, the nitty-gritty of how militant
It's just a
investigation
defense
should
model
go.
of debate.
So, yeah.
Okay, how does the apps Milton preservation fit under that model where, like the PPP versus the Zapatistas?
Well, that's one example. We think that we've defined what it means to be militant. We think that hapticality meets that
okay, what would
interpretation
not
of
constitute
militancy.
militancy?
The Taiwan app?
Yeah.
Start real quick.
Let me send it over. It is sent 5 and then kiss.
Sorry, can you say that again?
5 and then kiss. Okay, let me know when I'll get it.
Oh, we're good.
Okay, is okay, is anyone not ready? Okay.
First off, interpretation of what is to specify the individual relation to their advocacy, the valid because they want to see as refusing explicitly highlight Coppell's role, the affirmative reason, the ground reason for its point, its ground key to their offense against them against the agents of their advocacy point, its presumption is their burden that the team is intrinsic to the advocacy, or by definition is not their advocacy. Academics are groundless to me if I anti-black institutional power without the inclusion of personal experience between any of the social how the determine the knowledge that is practice making, dominant urban knowledge making practice without this future prospect, single perspective of the power to be process, personal experience, organization, intellectual, internal evidence provides argumentation that perhaps in favor is not to be required to be relied on perspective of libertarian theory becomes realist, distance problematic as prevents a social political policy ruling community does most effective. Second off, their emphasis on the whole of slave ships of the slave trade and the modern slavery, purely in reference to African diaspora, emphasis describes the tyranny of the Atlantic. Allen and 40 African sword ribs of the tyranny of the Atlantic subsidies, and invoked an Allen to fight alongside murders and ocean and marriages with set of crucial testification with pre-actual borders and world living for Italian and ocean importance and history of system that is scattered more than 20 million of state colonial plantation. The concept of the theological jurisdiction of the idea of the declaration of the fact that the full understanding extended by translating preoccupation with the particular book negative to de-Atlanticise of what is seen and adopt a global systems theory of reality theorization to produce explicit citation of worlds of being enslaved and boys, Jewish centrism, and Zelda, and an active model of public and plan of the region of departments of African and New America. That's also the such a construct the considered African Americans speak about university during the Atlantic world to identity and dialects African diasporas are different and intersect in the historic of the African diasporas are not for the Canadian restrictions reshape everything Canadian station social political content Afro including the African terms of slavery include blacks but often confined in them. And next off, narrating black suffering traced to the spectacular violence and racial capital crowds at Black Manchester impact is ungendered and analysis that can't account for racial risk and reproductive labor of James. Importing consideration of handle whichever which word is being held like the true hold by the board of captain. Females are reported to the Catholic justice. A racial gender with masculine national pain unfolding. A black woman trauma black woman and perception blasphemy became represented trauma racial weapon. Became subdued on the racial capital of physical knowledge heritage and constitution over South slavery. The common race of Jim Crow and as for her suffering was found black babies to place of graduate obligation that before surviving rapists, but then rapists, masculine broken parental health, black patients, black philosophy, all this session for problem for the sterilization of visa, purpose black philosophy, engagement, rubber, mind, mortality, feminized black and some church level of transparency over black eagles, the national routine arrangement, black women, public information, officer, racial violence, purpose black patients with all speak of favorable belly, being boxing, captivity, and captivity, like this, any black enemies of Maroon Josh, with the any black feminists as the black patients, constitution, trying to tear for the side of democracy, the Maroon fails to commit the third Maroon of the establishment of the reason of democracy, the manufactured black patients, it's full of reference, father's president, and illustrations, and black patients, not information, deficit, differentiation between the nation and African athletics, segregation, universal black women, for reform of sexuality, and effortlessness, the capital realism, the final balance, the honest, the words, the confined by catching, the warfare, conventional racial active, aboard the effortlessness, fight molesting, state, women who are trying to like control, hang images on, if by condoms, my father, language from Boone, terrifying because it represents conventional political protest. So what is the conception of movement building the race? Or lives of ableist instruction both racial state violence and the ability to participate in struggles against race and fusion remains skeptical of this move to ratio to the 1 now HEC and something removed by the real words to the northern dimension ability and autism, blackness, and found the instruction, opposition, ageism, and actual race to the rate to movement and provoking that any police brutality not already real plans on black people that are practiced with black people, the deficit reflects control from the boom, the move, like time with black people, the representation ratio of lots of definitely choose all parents for the full including more like black people, no movement of racial validation, whether by cameras for children or worlds, like time with the record of the reading, and no kind of company in the offices who are lacking this, yet looks more black things to people killed by the police. Their calls for appeals to haptics and metallic love you to being held in touch. Repeat that violation of black women throwing crisis of slaves, shades of intimacy, spells, and hundred like somebody's recognition of social order than that. These are another crisis of mentality, less below unstable crisis social order, seeking to allow pleasure. This like creatures to belong to the entity, also to the bleeding, and into personality, retrospective, and into the returnable figure that bodies that are to be enough to approach power, touch, and haptics, seeking and thinking, and intergenerational blast, and herbal haptic power, becomes a set of power who, when it violently, what is he spelled in the forefront, gender and disability, active to most of the tropes of surveillance, resilient survivor, and romanticizes military encounters, alternatives to doubt the black feminist disability frame Riley, and 18 of black women said to the betrayal of the future often used to represent highlights how the confidence and transformation approach to the narrow body direction and critical engagement with black women seeing that to embrace disability, black women's disability frame so scaffolding, the leaky general railway back should be able to close engagement with the figure of black women's scholarship, and work with the generation notes and relationship trouble with the relationship both the transform to the big religion sex under the relationship approach to fosters who want to refer to intersectionality access rating of human budgets of black and self-construction and show back to ranking also develop disability to lose life for weakness disability figure normal bodies with multiple side evidence to suitability that stretching essentials middle of doubles able to resolve black suffering black and cerebral pulling the last time that explains like those blood identified stable often shared video and able to move lower stress and the rating that traveling series that using the black and series of the fair next becomes possible. Voting negative refuses to separate anti-blackness from and enables recentering accessibility as THET and takes no more than the favor of accessibility of race and disability how we can transfer back into the one from robin the ability from blackness back to video from news accessible to people that are monthly and police down. Skip the next off, go to the fifth one. There's the Station of Revolution Institution Building. Advocates concerned for true from the power of DC revolution to reactive versus the anti-Escalante. In 19, real power to massive institutions, also self-anti-realism, institution funding, and political knowledge. Literacy models of the future possible revolution, product to help people climate change, and post-week world function, applications, survive, regulations, survive the world consequences, war, and constant war, and people states of further responsibility, cheap resource extraction, not finding ways to serve themselves. Documents that like real possibility, the tendency of the ordinary people sort of pair and situations, and unlocking something that continues to be alongside revolutionary. Also, the links together the revolution movement towards revolution and revolutionary institutions, in part 2 having and building based out the onslaught of capitalism has manifested in massive violence, Escalante, and active role of military characteristics. Construction comes the fast-paced capital to corrupt reducing economic context that they will break the changing governments of any fashion decay, using right to the last of Roman and American by Fox's weapon, and massive don't know how to Marxism, can appeal the bills less in Marxism, making choice to unify work with and kill and keep your and feel struggle that you have possibly possibly use true ideas, create possibility, unify global celebration, as a state possibility, create philosophical, and scientific base revolution, possibility, alternatives from the battle of the Communist Party is key to effective accountability mechanisms and mobilizing marginalized communities, Escalante, and HB is putting proper rights can be afforded by federation party or anything party or anything allows this move solidified and revolutionary source tending to represent that possible to our outside, building institutions often release from capital world based we have a party on board putting conference party with membership of Roman Democratic Party that are democratic central system making the Holy Parliament accountable. You find action go for educating organizations helping accountable for the with the unified work to try to get country self as a kind of crucial appeals and including ideal framework to the organization who was really allowed to address these working to the offer the power of treatment education and comes to practice real estate covers capable of defending institutions with power that link to my national long-term goal. This is the reformulation of classic white Marxism. Socialist organizing must enter anti-racist struggle, mandating white allies put their lives in line for revolutionary anti-capitalist adopting blocking massive demand for entire working class urban. Let's take that card. Case. Vote negative for presumption of permanent military strategy. The abject should not be sufficient policy making for one to see, especially if those movements like the already discipline internally between affirmative affirmation and catalyzation for the movements or result in actual collaboration. How that manifests in the level of debate, not doing so sorts of hardest and most important parts of resistance to theory, materialize the level of institution and procedure. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one. Okay. Go back to the fourth off of the scale. Their favorite social militarization to understand racialized violence is cleansing of governance and double terms of money see Hubble and its humans and underestimate how the racial entity horizontal the martial for the following legislation based on conflict and implication wars study conflict implicitly assumes the price of the legislation and logic to the words after separate to representation versus fictional places that have been utterly shaped by warfare colonial violation but warfare like history but little politics which is not from the part of the anti-black violence and these histories because we look before the approach martial politics space with the before and after just wrote the legislation order normal politics just refuse to endorse the 1AC without a favorable militarization.
I still think that. Do you want me to record and cap? You sure?
You good?
Yes.
What is a black feminist disability framework?
The last piece of alternative evidence says that when we present analytics of how the world operates, the rereading of those should be understood as the alternative. So the 180's understanding of logistics, of hapticality, the alternative rereading of those things is the performance and the endorsement of a black feminist framework.
Wait, so what did the alternative do different than the reading of the 1AC?
A lot of things. It identified the 1AC as a site in which the black matrix was disarticulated. So we will make arguments about why the sort of grammar of the 1AC of logistics within debate, hyper-visible moments of anti-black violence crowds out the grammar of intimate violence, and also arguments about why
that's my next question. Is like saying X violence exists ignores Y violence Y.
So the James evidence preempts that argument and says that it's not a link of omission but a link of displacement, i.e. how analytics of violence that displace and crowd out alternative grammars to understand how the violence that afflicts the black matrix.
So that would assume that the grammar of logistics cannot understand racial rape or gendered analysis of violence. Does the 1NC have a card of why logistics doesn't explain
We'll make an
those
argument
things?
about why it's not about what you say you do, it's about what you actually do. The examples given in the 1AC will sort of prove our argument. The examples of taboo clash of civilizational debates is the hypervisualization of anti-black violence.
So this
that
goes
ignores
back to you
the
didn't
violence
say
that occurs
examples of racial rape.
underneath militancy. The debater getting called on them is the stop and frisk logic that the James evidence is indicting.
So
Those things are not neutral, and it's not a coincidence that you chose those examples. Our argument is that the point of the alternative is to hold you accountable for choosing those examples and understanding how that grammar of suffering crowds out the grammar of
Okay,
black people.
I still don't understand the crowd out argument.
I think I've explained it enough.
You've said that we have not chosen to
It's
say
not
those
that
examples.
you didn't do something. It's that the examples that you chose were purposeful, and you should be held to those examples.
So why just okay. The critique, what is dual power? The last critique, sorry.
The Escalante evidence indicates that dual power is a method of base building at the local level and vertical, horizontal level, but also party organizing through broader revolutionary movements.
So why do people organize? Why? Who cares?
So our Escalante evidence indicates that dual power is capable of providing material needs like food, water, and shelter for poor and oppressed people, which is sufficient. Or I guess to answer your question about why are people doing this, they need material goods, which is a necessary part of it. But
so
also our evidence indicates that movements and those communist movements are happening now. The question is collectivizing those struggles underneath the banner of anti-communism.
The sort of movements that are happening now, is there enough energy, enough people, if it were just to orient in another direction, or does it need more participation?
What do you mean by oriented towards another direction?
So like you said, they're not vertical enough, or they aren't dual power. You said that orientation is good. Do current status quo movements have enough people and energy?
Well, our argument is that the collectivization of those things is necessary towards the deconstruction of global capitalism.
So it's just collectivization, there's no new participants in those movements?
Well, there also will be new participants.
Okay.
The Escalante evidence in the last one says that there are democratic centralized decision-making processes as to how recruitment would happen, which provides
Is
effective
that
accountability.
recruitment necessary for the alt to solve?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 8. Status of the alt.
Conditional.
Do we see titles? stop for a quick second. Just having a brief. Stop. 6:57. I think we can. Right. Right. I sent the cards. I like use the bathroom, so I'm just. Wait, how much y'all 6:57.
Leaving tonight?
I'm leaving tomorrow. I hope. Is it yours?
We have 2 more weeks to do.
Oh, thanks.
We are
Well, that's actually kind of worse because you're wasting weekends.
yeah, that's true. We skipped Wednesday to Friday.
Yes.
We could drive home after this, you know?
Oh, no joke.
Yeah, we plus we could drive home after this.
Driving home tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so brutal. Why would you put yourself through that?
You ain't gonna pay for the light of the problem.
Wait, to be fair, you guys get to just sleep. Like, it's the person driving that is brutal.
That's true. It's kind of messy.
It's hard to sleep in like a van though.
What?
It's not a bad, it's true.
Incorrect.
It's bouncy. Oh, you have a bus? Like a whole bus?
The charter.
Oh, okay, that's easy.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
You have
You're
to
living.
No,
No,
to be fair, Westwood.
We got a van and a Scion.
Yeah, we brought a lot of things.
I'm gonna go to the van like soon. How many was it?
61.
61. What the
So we have 4 of them.
Oh man, then we
No,
still
there's
there's
only
20
one
extenders.
They're all
There's so many PS.
It's been thinking about the date.
I just want to
Right
like.
there.
He's prepping.
Yeah, he's prepping.
Mental prep.
Oh, the restrooms upstairs are all locked.
There's one that.
Okay, well there he is.
One.
They have to go home. They have to go home.
Okay. The order. It's gonna be case, T-body politics, militarization pick, the Atlantics K, the James K, and the Cap K. Yeah, case, T-body politics, can I have one? The militarization pick, Atlantics K, the James, black female, ableism stuff, and then the Cap K. Let's do this. Everyone good? Cool.
Voted for politics and military preservation that traces the logistical code of DCS FMS and revitalizes societies and neural blockage that stops the process of individuation to enjoy the ongoing system of logistics as a mode of mutual indebtedness against the white form of institutional violence, similar to the feel of the holder that how the people that fled South Asian policies but oriented against logistics is here. The logistics has infiltrated spaces like debate, the examples and then wanting to see the alt-right friction judicial games, anti-black debate practices like black getting the consequence of the nature of round robins, the shrinking of black judges all prove our argument of how logistics has infiltrated debate and try or die for a model of debate that prioritizes mutual indebtedness as a way to endure the ongoing violence of logistics and presumption arguments, presume that we are somehow catalyzing ongoing movements, which is definitely not the affirmative. It's a question of the Wanisi's model of debate that we have presented, and the way military preservation is a good idea or not. Our argument is that within spaces like debate, there is some form of agency that we're able to create. There's two reasons as to why the presumption is definitely not true. First is a ballot rewiring argument. The ballot evidence is that every single logistics has infiltrated our cognitive linguistic processes, but every sort of neural rewiring is a form of rewiring those neural firings towards a process of society that blocks the system of logistics. Second is that every ballot is an iterative process proven by how the legal project increases meaningful black participation and how framework itself as an argument has evolved over time. I'll do the theory of power debate here because it implicates a lot of the other flows. Is that we have a theory of logistics ballot says the violence has transitioned to the era of the code and so with our cognitive linguistic functions institutional reform reorients the code that expands it, but the formation of the algorithm itself is based off of the expropriated communicative racial violence. T-body politics. We most definitely meet to this. We do define our relationship to it. Brass and are mutually implicated in the violence against logistics. There's a couple massive dissents that have a sort of in-round impact that outweigh anything for the prioritize because it's a reason to reject the team. First is a question of outing because I shouldn't have to determine my own individual relation to it. Second is an individuation deciding demoted and hardy evidence impact or forms of individuation because when we focus on specific forms of violence that ignores how people are mutually indebtedness in things like this, which will be later impacted in all the case analysis that I did above also probably applies to just their interpretation can't solve because it's only one tier of the three-tier methodology, which is the removing piece of evidence that they read counter-term. Debate should be over militancy versus militant skills. Versus militant skills is the only way to create sorts of endurance strategies, especially in debate that can sort of recreate social energy. And second is the question of sociopoiesis. The human analysis that every reading is a route to which their interpretation can't access. Militarization pick. Permutation by permutation to the counterplay. Defining the Wanisi through a lens of militarization is the only fair one to understand logistics and the larger frame of how relationality is controlled by a violent forward touch. And net benefit is accuracy. Can't solve the efficacy form of Q1. Is skills they that uniqueness questions of logistics in the here and now. Even if they win the counterplay methodologically good doesn't trade the right form of skills. Second is sociopoiesis. Wanisi realizes that every reading is a rupture one that is sociopoiesis. They can't access the affective level of socius, which is the pig. Operates the level of policy, not playing the logistics remains that we reject pseudocentrism as common good. And also pseudocentrism pointing to the era of the highly educated people who they don't notice or even their research to the actual language of human action and body defense against the text and dumbass text to be read. Such as the Western imperialist and psychological groups often are inaccessible or threatening charges of regulatory power to state the hegemony needs to be exposed in our righteous and not transmitted the activities and agencies that exist. The verbal these university means that we pay attention to messages that are coded and encrypted to actual linguistic modes of communication fixed by the steely after without performative which proliferates jurisprudence practices in debate that display potentiality for Jewish and politics text revolutionary potential conditionalities of education first distress students and devices to its office because of law cross application second advocacy skills counter words contrary positions skills portable skills third is after red content goes for the least comfort arguments shallow debates counter to one conditional option that landscape. Permutation due by permutation of the alternative. Our arguments that the birth of the system of logistics is from the middle class, but now it's a globalized system. It's not a story, it's not Eurocentric, which takes out a link. There's something intrinsic about the birth of model logistics because if you can encode it in the algorithmic model, i.e. slave logistics, impact is accuracy. If we want our theory of logistics, that means it outweighs the other examples are card side or not the birthplace of model logistics, which means that it can't solve the case solve the impact. Hapticality means we affirm things like the highland people that flee the party says the global system. Why Ronan Hardy says that model logistics is globalized, that they feel hapticality is too because the code works and we work the code at best. It's a link of omission because it's simply that we didn't talk about it. Our argument is not that these didn't exist, but the middle class has created logistics. Also not unique to their ability to resolve the impacts they've gone for because Western logistics will always co-opt your project because of pointing to other systems so let's just infiltrate and individuate our politics because you can cross-apply all the offense da. The F solves the K. We reordered Newtonian time and space. James. The James K. Case outweighs in turns the K. The logistics makes gender violence inevitable, absent endurance, mechanism, aesthetic politics like the ability to journey social life. To say that blackness is anti-civilizational, I put a disavow the very concept of the white hatred imperial be a heteropatriarchal being whose process of accumulation sustains the sustains logistics. Two implications. First is that there's no link. The one see as an inner forms of militant opposition. Thus is that these are examples of militant debates. Second is the link to why similar vanchism drains psychic energy from Basadi's first James card incorrect characterization of blackness is not sentimental. Blackness is a form of understanding the mutual implicated form of violence, i.e. identities are incomplete, but also always incomplete. One of their permutation due with black study draws from militarization at CRG. Berkeley et al. 18 black studies of people coming together to learn about and from each other one before Moon. Talks about study, I imagine a coverage of country and affirming over a couple of that is given as the road by logistics makes their impacts and narratives Moon 2030 for logistics subject of water must yield to the opposite water to change without posture or the way to send it from the table in the state that they are assembled. There's no impact state. Correct tendencies sounds going masculine hypervisibility is inevitable in the world of logistics, but our withdrawal flow logistics blocks the system, which means that we solve the king, not the other way around. The alternative is just fundamentally planned plus, which means that the permutation sells all off as there's no affect links Moon and Hardy. This is our concept of affect, whether I say we should because they're a form of individuation, where I say that we should focus towards modes of relationality. They also replicate ableism. They need to fix relationality, say violent, corrective, to change the wrong. That's hard to 13 competence and orientation towards participation. Those in policy eligible to change policy, disposition, governance, any form of creation, how it's social reproduction, what it agrees to the actual, how it's policy violently manifests more wrong action to correct for the ones who would be correct under policy, more participation, more change when those who plan to get the starting participation with the first thing is crisis policy, any crisis productivity is in crisis and participation for wrong participation of the wrong, the consummation of planning is the inevitability of crisis. We plan to do anything, sticking with policy, can't read it, but it's intelligent. We've got to play this, and individuation said black feminist epistemology ensures that we theorize from our level of the individual fracture ability to fight for one each other rather than ourselves. Our theory of logistics implicates James' theory of the material libidinal linguistic economies because it controls the trajectory of the swarms of plot. There's a photo. Ethnography is that preservation and modern society is always anti-heteromasculine, drawing from the form of vertical black female ethnography that's Isoki and 18 modern breaks with the heteromasculinist writing conventions calls the day whereby the new generation of scholars should get back to their former radical black female ethnography and photoethnography, phonological writing of black social life versus the spatial temporalities of coloniality. James also flows us as we need to theorize black feminism as not politically like their alternative, but as more into the ungovernance of the cap. Case outweighs logistics, fashion, socials, organizing means that issues your purity, politics, free friendly awareness that continues to wage war against black rock communities, capitalism, can't explain how bodies are overcoded by race and how overkill operates or how intimate violence happens in spaces like the one season update to their theory. Logistics is the newest wave of capitalism that containerizes and privatizes Alpha permutation due to the parties that were happening party that's chairman of the 19-hour party was the new Communist Party. Parties want to start refugees, Senate revolutionary planning, so rather than the course we they dominate the Communist parties or historical communists, so we begin to differ from self party was a black revolution, black rock communist party. Both parties entered to coercion about the force that made Communist parties the name for analysts. Medieval teachers were ordered to be one party, both people were trying to keep each other alive, but the cops can for the rich and society and the cops like say, limiting the constant intimacy of on the road to the black and brown people's emancipation for these conditions are mutually implicated, being with each other, the way we being with you in the wake of your death, we begin common to each other, we begin communist link. The link framing all link arguments are solid theatrics proves that we have injected our unproductive blockage into the archive of the rest that refuses to sell you the edifice of capital. There's also a link to the new bootstrap narratives, demonizing the app as unproductive in nature in the face of capitalism, treats out with social transformation, which imposes the necessity of mandatory improvement, vertical organizing apps and racial ethics are bad, makes the room as colorblind to racial issues, which always puts black and brown bodies on the back burner for the interest of the party. There's a social energy to that there. Move to logistics is a form of draining social energy, which enables a prerequisite to the alt solvency. No impact extinction is now not 2050 for black and brown bodies, but being indebted to one another is a prerequisite because it creates an incentive to act over things like warming. The white being controls the logistics of the causes extinction. That's got me inside of the ship. Has to be cultural, not an economic, mental, social structure, being human is about both sociological, conscious, social, the environmental, warning, distribution, water system remain. These aspects of instituting our breath of the class of the human factor by our is was there person definition was to be given that became now a reduction with whole location mutation, the new relationship with the dually derived capital self, first of all, with the verbal model, production capital that controls us for the process to be functionally supposed to be discursively instituted, the economic function between the economic governance, the function of that identity, not the other way around. We cannot see this because we are within the biological of the being and the conceiving the human, we cannot see how it works the alternative holds explanation to a high social data and explain how they solve warming. They get cracked down on Anderson, Samusiati, disimported rain, from movement leaders that we are reading harms, mass movements have been also registering the states targeting of leaders. We see corruptible leaders worth interrogating how we can benefit more forceful autonomous organizing. There's the expropriation is that their alternative fails to account for the ways in which capitalism extracts value beyond expropriation, leaves the lumpen proletariat behind us. O'Brien. In 19, the socialist parties have been ambivalent towards lumpen proletariat for the dignity of working class. Socialism takes time with the revolutionary project. These circles of the racialized poor reported because they were not from the working class and choosing black leaders leading workers leading strikes with the rights. The ministers of the capitalism actually the working class and overcome the class and they will healing and many solidarity and love across these fractures. We need communist parties themselves as respectivity, our revolution, logicals, and reason many broken miserable places place that ourselves into something that our fierce and revolutionary potential emerges. Yeah.
Okay, are you good for prospects?
Yeah.
My first question is about this last piece of evidence that you read on the CAPK. Why does it not link to the AF as well?
You have to explain to me how it links to the app for me to explain to you why it doesn't.
Well, your argument is just that our movements get cracked down upon.
Oh, that piece of
AF,
evidence. Yeah, so the app isn't a movement.
Well, what do you mean? You have adopted militant preservation as a strategy that is materially implicated.
So, like, not all strategies are movements, right? So our argument is that militant preservation affirms the field and mode of relationality in which people come together to resist the form of logistics. Coming together doesn't mean that we, get on the streets, form a movement, which is sort of rather what the alternative tries to do with the formation of the party. Our argument is that first, is in the context of debate, militant preservation is good. But second is, like, also out there sort of creates moments of intimacy. Which
what do you mean by, like, those moments of intimacy? It still requires a collective, coming together of people physically, right?
There's a difference between coming together and a movement in which there is a telos to our politics. There are leaders within the vertical organization that you described of what dual power is.
Okay, so the argument is just that the leaders, the forefronting of a formal movement structure gets cracked down upon. Yes. Okay. The next question I have, the Gagnon card, what is the distinction between logistics and capitalism? Because that seems very crucial to your theory of power.
Yeah, sure. So it's like, to say that, like, so how Marx and sort of Engels have their theorization of historical materialism, i.e. it operates in there are certain waves and historical points of capitalism. Our argument is that the latest point of capitalism is logistics.
So beginning from the modern birth of slavery, etc., the modern card. Okay, so beginning of modern logistics is like an update to capitalism, but like what is the implication?
Yeah,
of
so
that?
like I guess the implication is like if you look at the Beller evidence is that so like it's not solely a question of materiality, but also a sort of question of the ways in which it becomes linguistically and semiotically encoded.
Okay, so the evolution from labor to linguistics semiotics. Got
Yeah, but like yeah, sure.
Okay.
The implication, like debate terms, is that the alt isn't called the app, but the perms.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
James K.
Yeah.
First of all, what was the second subpoint at the top? The first one was like no link. The second one.
Link turn, so like the process of logistics drains energy from like black female aesthetics.
Okay, so just logistics drains energy. The app with
From the
logistics.
ability of the alternatives.
Okay, and then this isocave photoethnography evidence.
Yeah.
I just don't understand what this is.
Yeah, so it's like the idea is that like militant preservation as a strategy is always sort of positioned antagonistic to the like heteromasculinist white man because it requires one to break with the ways in which linguistics is overcoded by.
Card seems very specific about Moten's writing and breakage from quote writing conventions. So like the citation of certain authors, is that like their argument?
No. So like when they say that like their form of radical black female ethnography became one of phonoethnography, our argument is that it disavows the way in which like certain like Moten, for example, disavows or understands the way in which logistics has infiltrated our linguistic processes and says that our forms of resistance should be sort of oriented around sociality. Our argument is
why
that
is it different from finishing?
Yeah, so it's just like militant preservation is always antagonistic to those linguistic conceptions.
Yeah. 7.
Okay, I have to like run around to find it. So like, where was it? I really went downstairs.
Wait, there's one upstairs though. Where? It's right around the opposite corner of the red side.
Got it.
Unless it's locked out, but I don't think so.
They are, yeah, within the body.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah.
Okay, it's the K, the James K.
So James. Brady.
Good. Okay.
We have explicitly impact terms of strategy of militancy, their framing of logistics with the debate, and their framing of the militancy outside of addition, making the only argument terminally unpersuasive, landing questions of specificities in the context of analysis that pulverize particular bodies in specific ways is both the impact of the alternative, would forefront disability and generous co-constitution, you should over-prioritize these mundane forms of erasure, Harriet Tubman's hyper insomnia, low to epilepsy, the weaponization of disability, black children, elders, cleaver, raping black women, the Black Panther Party, all proof you have to overcorrect for historic erasure of gender disability in the context of fighting logistics, the black matrix is both the underbelly and fulcrum of Western democracy in the midst of logistics change, in a human commission design of and every action of having black women invest in the most organization of consuming was a foundation for the raw material from the capital material, tenth of revelations, theories of histories, condensed by the theory, battle to call for theories of democracy, profit, purpose on the track towards doing an exploitation of capital material, predatory, democracy, the development of black matrix, as he utterly institutions, the black matrix, and the Western womb just fulcrum to leverage power to line by line, the first argument about no link, because they're not built in opposition. I'll mention this argument here. Coppell's Twissy, this argument was not great, so the 1 year will try to weasel their way out of debating us with the noble argument. One, the first example of their grave evidence is the Baptistas who were armed revolutionaries, eating the noble empties of national liberation army, giving to hear the whatever Marcos that the people's armed rebellion. Second is another example. Graver cites the 2001 Argentina riots, which were also organized militancy, monitoring, intending Christopher returning to the participation of the general protests in the largest mass publicity started on militancy in December 2003 about popular impeachment. They will say that's about their one-load debate. That is our whole argument. The part of the act is their endorsement of a one-load debate, i.e. debates over militancy. If we impact our debates under that model, obviously those should be linked arguments to the critique because they have chosen to make this debate. They have chosen to make this debate a debate about debates. And so when I see, so we obviously at least do this argument. There is that there should be no doubt in your mind. The title of the book, The Grave Evidences, come from is militant investigations, collective theorization, sworn is magnified by the references and citations of militancy, which can't be divorced from Rodriguez's call for fighting the race for humanity. Rodriguez 19, a six way because it's like military relation, rebel to movements, the many points of these forms of the willingness of collective spring, anti-colonial revolution, or throwing national governments five, even if they don't take up arms in the midst of logistics. Others, well, you should think about what happens when legacy is placed on infowars and white supremacists. See the word militancy now. The second argument about how logistics creates energy. One, our alternative evidence says that the process of tracing and identifying the way they're measured method implements black matrix is energizing, which solves this argument. Second is that being able to explain this argument in one hour, but this act is kind of ridiculous. They literally just affirm care for the sake of care and energy, so for the sake of energy, and just saying this beneficial for black women is wrong and disproven by your link arguments. The first link is the black militant link. He produces subjects that are either born from the hypervisible imago of the black militant because of their weakness or pathologize for falling outside their imago of strong black revolutionary, therefore wording of a strong active revolutionary who's programming ableist tropes like that of the strong black woman who's uniquely strong, able to endure pain and surmount difficult obstacles which cause psychological violence against black women and black disabled folk, which outweighs lots of black folks can't just refuse internal debates or politics because they have to keep going to their doctor or receiving care. They're structuring logical people being expelled as enemies of the revolution or experiencing psychological violence, which is particularly true in the context of the theorization of logistics outside of that's the HTC and James Evans versus the survivability must be given a unique frame in the context of disability. You should vote negative for a counter history that connects black nationalism directly to disability activism, which right in on the pushing on the master buildings and she black members disabled rap black activism must treat upstream mixed into black hair disability activism with these mutually bigger time for lines black then provided food the best black members in option proud of free mixation with the previous civil slavery of disability reference the red black panther team because of the low max table black revolution black nationals matter or command the black members will commit each other's protest every day vendors and it's about right place permission this effort is a person with multiple sclerosis and most children walks understand independent living services when movement stopped forefront disability and dismissed disability activists for operating in the realms of feeling rather than militancy ableism caused fractures and the shutdown of survival services which turns the act the BDP proves in a line.
Deeply later ableism and later comprehended by the black disabled disability consciousness shows of the variety with black referring to occupation as a plain of the language feeling constance to demonstrate their dwelling in the rather than that of multiple backs to the all sounds working back to the combined level politics of BB like reference to center for action the aspiration of black freedom was going to control the disability right activism. Second is a mutually assured destruction frames militancy for black women. The only whispered end is apocalypse under their demand for militancy within militancy. James in 13 abandoned for the videos of damage to the weapons and retained from the collective the alliance black women. Think understood in the bodies were from both cyber versus the what's all team great solitary emerges with the speaking revolutionary cyber within their own people time in the space and the struggle within cyber what would matter would be a form of and making it serve without the enslaved who cannot have themselves the structures not the abolition of the whole space of personal retaining this time that the colonization cyber figure so large has to be seen in interior rights and the minds of our most revolutionaries men came to a card of the lady bloody death under season one can never lose one partner there's only M18 they say that we are always incomplete sure but the ask method is bad which we have impact in which the legal arguments will prove their reputation the one their evidence is a black feminist study means coming together that's not a complete argument nor does it disprove any of our arguments or prove that the reputation is viable second is that severance intrinsic this is about issue it can make that from moving trying to base critical education impossible which undermines the capacity for organizing in the midst of logistics and critical education third is no reputation method debate shifting advocacy away from the topic and functionally defend the status quo makes them a moving target makes generating offense almost impossible the only competition we can generate is to their scholastic starting point forward to the link to all distance we're the only thing reading cards that direct your approach towards valuing scholarship prefer the daily evidence it makes a sequencing argument about the tendency for scholarship to focus on some forms of violence at the expense of others sisters also the material violence against black women with disabilities and other black women fifth is to crowd out this side excellent James Evans you should refuse every impulse that you have to conceive of these arguments as a link of emission James explicitly says that our link is not a link of emission but a link of displacement they have performed enacted the link argument when you see when they say quote racial terror forms infinite violence within the system unquote we have explicitly impacted this argument as an analytic because it always overcoats infinite violence in favor of the spectacular and lies and analogizes violence with the block matrix they say logistics makes the impact and those cards that sentence long in a literal word salad even logistics broadly causes ableism that doesn't disprove our link arguments there's a spectacularized violence like spectacularizing public sex violence in the midst of logistics cuts out the illegal racial right that is subsumed under racial capitalism the colonization of black women and matrices are left having no record on sexual trauma forced breeding and abuse or nationalized background with the spectacularization of violence we have a couple of specific examples in the context of the 20 first for example logistics within debate for example they've offered like clash of civilizational reason refusal to invite certain groups around Robbins proves at least conceivable about violence as creating the spectacularized piece of competition argument is not that is that it's not about what happens in the hyper-visible arena of competition but the mundane moments and intimate violence that occur within the hotel rooms and squad rooms against black women their example of black skin time the cops call them exactly what James is criticizing it's how the common perception of black suffering becomes embodied and represented by male trauma through the examination of spectacular moments like stop and frisk which crowds out the black matrix this turns every argument they have about logistics within the debate that the James Evans sickness that they don't understand the logistics is premised on brown and black versus the system this nationalizes the intimate racial terror that takes place inside of black and brown communities against black women and disabled and the black disabled folk which is proven by all the examples in the overview they say the alternative is a plan plus not no explanation of this or why it's true or how the alternative but negative to rethink when I see through a black feminist and disability framework it's necessary scaffolding to think through the complexity of militancy as a response to the logistics breaking down scholastic tendencies to default to a single issue struggle and then attempting to fit everything neatly into that conception actively produces balance within their movement that's the ability of HTC evidence your all solvency deficit your solvency burden for the alternative should be if we would look into the one to see that turns and outweighs the there's a sufficient reason to negative both teams agree to some capacity that it's impossible to resolve anti-blackness or logistics through a debate on but if we win that their method for addressing logistics is that we should vote negative they say that argument or that their evidence says that we should focus towards relationality not all relationality is going to be an impact on hapticality as a method which will be extended in the one year they say we should they say assumption that we have to fix relationality is bad one the framing issue is that this is inevitable within the debate their argument that any form of disagreement with the emphasis form of fixing them creates a dangerous precedent which within debate because it means that every decision you render is a form of rendering someone incomplete second is that it links to the choice they assume the alternative of the black feminist matrix needs a corrective that is the choice the individuation is that one this is answered with the James evidence in the overview which says that analyzing the black matrix is always already analyzing the study of the fulcrum of democracy second is that we will impact on this the idea that we are all in this together it's the same high school band bullshit that deprioritizes the demands of black women which is proven by all of our multiple examples in the overview third is that this is a double turn with the one you see they explicitly identify black and brown folks as those fighting the race war which means that they've already double turned the whole life and individuated the struggle the porn ethnography dissents cards about 2 sentences long and just as modern references black women that's not an argument nor does it disprove that anything we have said they say we can't trade black women we can't trade they say we operate within the train of the protocol not true no explanation a lot of the 2AC was really bloody all of the cards are about 1 or 2 sentences long so you should give me a lot of leeway in the 2 hour extend the hapticality link there calls for appeals to the haptic sentimentality love freedom and being held in touch with people in violation of black women throwing into shades of shades of intimacy arguments is that the haptic is uniquely a space that is engendered by violence the affirmation of hapticality touch and feeling can be separated from the broader way that the haptic can be weaponized in order to deploy violence against black women which is proven by all our examples of intimate violence underneath the sort of fulcrum of logistics good yeah
this first James evidence you read doesn't say the word logistics once how does the black matrix explain logistics?
It says that it explains the fulcrum of democracy and the violence that
why do you think that logistics so the negative position is that logistics is equivalent to white domination.
It's an argument about how it explains how racialized violence operates because the womb of the black woman is literally where violence begins. That's what the James card says. Okay. So any analysis of racialized violence that does not begin with the black woman is due to failure. That's the point of the James card.
Okay,
You're right, it doesn't say the word logistics.
but the BPP card that you've read, what was the point?
Which one are you talking about?
The Schweik 11? I don't know.
The
Schweik.
Yeah, so the first one says that we should have a counter history in the context of how sort of resistance movements operate. Our rereading of the examples you've given vis-a-vis the Schickheits and Graeber card is important, which is our argument. That's the first white card.
The
second card says that the affirmation of militancy in the abstract ignores how sometimes in the underside of militancy, when people don't endorse militancy, what happens is important and we need to prioritize those forms of intimate violence.
Okay, so the question on the models of debate stuff was you have endorsed a model of debate in which other people could be violent, even if hapticality is not. Why do we have to defend what others do?
Because the 1AC has forwarded a particular vision of how debate ought to operate. If we impact turn the examples you gave for that vision of how debate ought to operate.
I understand the examples part,
a big part of this app is changing the way that current debates operate. Obviously, impact turning the examples for what debates happen under that model
under your model of
ground.
Like under the negativist model of debate, what do debates look like?
We do not endorse the model. Our only job is to impact turn yours. That was the burden we set.
So there's no what is the alternative to our model of debate?
There isn't one.
There is no alternative.
It's
to just reject it.
It's to reread the YC through a black women's matrix.
So the negative would always just reread the YC. There's no model.
We have not forwarded a model of debate, but we have said that your forwarding of a model of debate was violent towards black women. That is a sufficient impact turn to the YC.
The argument that you just said that it crowds out racial rape. What is racial rape?
So the examples of intimate violence that occur that aren't registered under the broader analytic of militancy or broader.
So what is that? Like, how do you know something is registered under the?
Yeah. So the James evidence actually goes through this and gives the example. So a couple of examples, right? The stop and frisk example is the one you see when you say that cops are called on black debaters. That is the stop and frisk logic.
I'm just saying
that is hyper visibilized. Like you're correct that there's
broadly. How do you determine what is registered
you're
and
correct,
what is not?
You're correct that we can't be like XYZ thing is hyper visible and XYZ thing is intimate. But there are obviously certain things that are hyper visibilized and hyper sort of mobilized in the context of how society analyzes violence against black folks. The James evidence goes through that pretty well and says that it aligns actually with how you describe violence. All of your arguments about waves and retreats of violence, all of your arguments about logistics.
Why does saying there's waves and retreats of violence means that you don't account for it?
The James evidence goes so far as to say that even saying that we went from the prison-industrial complex to the Jim Crow to that analytic, that sequencing of events, that is the process of hyper-spectacularizing anti-black violence that ignores the intimate violence that can't be captured.
That is not to say that intimate violence does not occur.
But
there's a broader register that prefigures the way that those
every move you make to say that this is legal mission is our link argument.
Okay. 704.
437.
Great. Let me send it.
Okay.
I think that's the first thing you have before.
I have you
427
right now.
347.
It is. The order will be the pick.
To which the what?
The pick.
Oh,
So the pick, T, the Atlantic's K, the cap K, and then case.
so A. Atlantics.
Cap case.
Cap case.
Okay, is anyone not ready? Okay.
Counterplay also 100% of the act. You should notice what he says is a good idea, but refuse to frame militarization. And the martial politics. We all agree that racism is unethical, but they fundamentally understand the origin of that racism and being rooted in liberal politics. And then first, not just to pick out of the word, but the process of quoteization, i.e. that it can be traced back to the process of prior to equilibrium before militarized violence process. And then once he bonus in logistics began the slave trade. And the first party card says, quote, even today's military logistics is most commonly outsourced to commercial firms to prove that they're invested in outbased account to prove that they have been perceived of prior to equilibrium 2. That is 2 impacts. One is the equation just said, militarization can't account for warfare constitution of politics to presume an origin for violence, but became militarized, aka time for militarization, which presumes an origin of logics of ableist, including anti-black ideologies, but also implicitly that demilitarization is possible. Securing of history matter determines both research and activist practice that informs the response to martial law. Second is liberals of descendant faith to account for liberal politics as well. They point to moments such as the slave trade as examples of militarization occurred. Martial politics instead of recognizing the existence of law itself is violent governance, is never neutral, but formed by chattel slavery and built on stolen land. All of our arguments on the Atlantic state prove that they have not complicated the idea that our arguments on the Indian Ocean as being prior to slave trade disprove their totalizing theory power. The one is correct to identify this as violence, but the way to describe that violence and business affords for the increased anti-aviation and the professional political taxes and hope that military and civilian affairs will be distinguished by its equal and active military some the process of veteran process of military movement of independent political and military rights to account origins of slavery and anti-black race military and children products and possibility activities immersive targeting people of the national department zone anti-black permutation debate permutation link for 7 alt is F minus including frame 3 critique links not including services body issue be incentivizes ambiguity to any specific age returns their military skills arguments. They also made a big deal of military power and the impact on their tracing violence as being demonstrations. We can't out of this permutation have to do accountable obviously ever because it starts on the frame of the 1AC. They shouldn't even get a permit to make the question of competing methods, which is the argument they made in the case of it. If they win this, kick the counterclaim. We still won on the case term because they're presented outweighs the accuracy argument. We've impacted their reading history, understanding the constant process, assumes that bonds didn't exist, proximity to passage, all done in the overview. Extend our evidence on the Atlantic state, in the ocean, important history, and the system that's got more than 2.2 million workers, which proves that they're active, their theorization is just not accurate, which is both the impacts. One, they say logistics in here, but the pick would solve that because not endorse specific theorization, because still finds a method to deal with it. They say social pieces is not an argument. Obviously, going to be that more than negative, but they said that it's a question of competing methods. We've won that there's a monster you shouldn't vote for the conflict. Just one, we're not to pick up the word with a frame for being embraced to the ratio, which means we don't link to this argument, and if we do, they link to back to this argument. Second, is that debate solves the pacification if I be equal, have to say something else. In our definition, I'm not muted and open to comparative debate. 3 is that it's about academic expertism, and they link back because they say the only Moon series right, and that pathology is everything else, which is argument. Our picks also don't make it fun. They say we steal the pick, but our performance doesn't make picks fungible. Multiple dissents to CSS. One is the deal, was the idea that they own the speech we are taking it. Is with the speech is intellectual property. Second is scholarship. Detailed debates on consistency of theory is what academics do. There's broad overlap, but we need to know how to compare the small difference in order to refine our strategy. Picks are good. We're not stealing any labor. We think the after rhetorical artifact is good and some is bad. Not only is get the pick of criticism descended from researching your base and force us to go for framing. After also conditionality outweighs non-topical acts, so the increased burden of proof. If the after doesn't read planning as a whole, then becomes a planning. Pick forces seems to defend something. Otherwise, the QC can just reshape what the after enters all their skills are. Now picks are inevitable. We will never distribute every one of the after arguments that we have to say racism is going to frame to pick as that CSS capitalist assumption of private part Western and anti-provable evil is that community private research and limit my global practices contradictions argue one that whiteness will never be coherent, will always be contradictory, and the status quo that proves the necessity of multiple contradictory positions in order to grapple with the tyranny and onslaught of racial violence. Second is that grappling with multiple scenarios, juggling which reaction, which was vital during racialized encounters will always be confronted with multiple scenarios, always be forced to pick what to choose between the difference between life and death. Theories that involve building skills to assurance their arguments, only testing multiple strategy, maximize capacity of everyday coherent strategies beyond the racialized dynamics. If they win their correct with unique question, then every debate matters. Fourth, that element that says that procedurals and bad double term with all their arguments. Five, that we can acknowledge that those arguments are bad solves any procedural one error impacts because the two in our should be to go and consolidate those. But the fact that one error consolidates us prove that we should get that we prove that they specify which ones are classifications for the two error. Otherwise, if we just too new, because then we unpredictable content predictions and we get four content adequacy. They take to see office benefits to see strategies to navigate racial lines that reflects the real world. They say we've also accidentally between maximum capacity of debate. We're not going for hospitality explicitly, but what explicitly consider we meet arguments say that they have a role in racialized dynamics. This is an independent argument to critique the truth how their strategy praised the black labor women while promising to take private practice about racialized dynamics within the debate, but also proves that their success that make them figureheads in the race, but they're trying to deflect and say willing to, which all freedoms ones say we're not the and we're not the ones that made the debate about racialized dynamics, about the ongoing obstruction of logistics. Second, we're merely going for the impact on the debate. We never promised the change of racialization within the debate, but they did. That turns the case because predicting militancy doesn't have black James and then next for interracial community who wrote about African American women, African descent, with militant black people, big rebels. Because it's also a black people African American continues to organize and shape little pictures which plays a role in not smart not they say for personality, but one for different method. They have spectrum relationships. Then you have methods in the abstract and how you relate to arms. So you also be me, which they link back to again. It's inevitable, just enough to make a decision. We have done what we talk about. They have also done it because they have talked about black and brown people in the theories that the ancient president which black kids can co-op strategy of black people. The Atlantic says that conceive permutation that's competition, but they don't actually solve the K with one sentence assertion that it's an answer to the infection to the frame. The captive and permutation field just said competition can't solve the distinction. One is about coping strategy, how to deal with it, which is proven by crossing, but movements can get cracked down upon. It can be cross-applied between sociality. Like yeah, but K would not link to the case. The terror as an iterative strategy is not negatable. We have to prove that it solves bounds within the
I think Steve, do you remember?
433.
433. Case. Case T pick K.
Food affirmative for military preservation, similar to the older highland people, the after the code of logistics and turns their word to an end at an incomplete field, critique and neural blockage and hostile individuation, which saps social energy needed for life students to endure logistics as a meal of evidence to see examples both in and out of debate for the saturation of logistics, which you have a categorical imperative to resist instances of violence touch that is replicated in spaces like debate, the non-negotiable arguments, definitely not true. Yes, it is negated, proven by the Chicago instances, there's little strategies you can combat it with. There's no warranty. This is like 2 5 seconds of the one are going to team. I'm going to answer the one card that they read on here. It's not that militancy can't account for the black pictures, but rather that militancy is distinct from militant preservation. Insofar as militant preservation is a form of love and care for each other, militancy is a form of violent insurrection, which is definitely not the one you see. They have answered the wrong critique, but they've definitely considered the outing is not just an independent reason to reject the team. It's a question of specific relationship to arm sales, the way in which those individuals are able to relate those arm sales to different from neutral, and it has to do with their personal identity, which is reason whether or not the pig. The pig one definitely doesn't solve the entirety of the effort. The question of performance, you can see the below notices that every reading is a rupture. I don't have a timer, does it? I don't have a timer. It says that every reading is a rupture, and this is specifically important because it's a question of the performative nature which we're able to enact out of itself. Even if the pig is a pig out of the process of, even if the pig is a pig out of the process of militarization, that's really important because the process of militarization is accessed differently by different bodies. The cognitive evidence is really good at this because this is a focus on linguistic practices, like saying that we should endorse the one he stands. The use of the word militarization is super important because it ignores how certain bodies don't have access to those linguistic processes, and there's always actual linguistic modes of communication. The erasure office knows it's not a question of erasing because we are not able to account for violence because this violence operates on particular textures. Even if we get rid of things like militarization, those forms get recreated through wild forms of policing within intimate forms of violence, which related later on the KDB, the Indian Oceans being a prior form of slavery. No, they've considered the accuracy net benefit because even if those prior forms of slavery didn't exist, the logistics is what sort of marked the birth of the Atlantic States, what marked the birth of the modern system of logistic permutation. Even if it's a question, even if the permutation might be, the permutation is most definitely solves a lot of their offense. The idea of being the F minus and turning military skills presumes that they want their linguistic focus is cut off the contribution which just impact rate for the question of strategies. I think the permutation was definitely resolved because they still create this circle where have to care and they haven't performed the same thing of the one. You see the capitalism assumption arguments that pigs are inevitable is definitely not us. Our argument is that picking out of performance is bad and is what recreates those capitalist structures because those people up there have access to those forms of linguistic communication, whereas black and brown students are literally fucking fighting the race where they don't have access. Okay. The problem with the two entities that you have described violence in the status quo without having a mechanism to resolve that violence, which is that a risk of assaultancy is prior, that you've impacted the wrong one. The one entity literally solved the terminal impact of the K because it says that intimate violence is inevitable insofar as logistics that both intercommunal and intercommunal violence that they go for will always happen because violent touch will literally be deployed absent disruption to the system of demolition. But realism says that every reading of sociality is a rewriting away from logistics to a sociality that creates the break within the system that allows the possibility for black feminism epistemology to exist in the first place. These people need social energy to engage in those politics in the first place. The risk that we solve the offense, the risk that we're able to create the forms of social energy is a reason to vote for this specificity arguments are impact or denied forefronting disabilities arguments. Even if you do forefront these forms of disabilities examples that they've literally cited that they also have a parasitic relationship to us, i.e. literally dropping examples of black women examples of the example about Harriet Tubman in the 20s. They've also spectacularized violence within the academy. There's no link differential because they for the question of performance, and that's what's about the black matrix understanding these arguments. No, it can't understand how it creates conditions for violence under the space like debate, even if it is the base level logistics and superstructure which sort of controls the way in which the base operates. The argument that our choice wasn't that great. That's what people the recutting of the gray route is presumes that that's what people could read about our actual interpretation, not what the actual AF is. You have not gone for a T argument, which is why our model debates argument exists, but rather it impacts onto the methodology of the one. It means that you don't get offense to our model debate. We're not violent, but rather forms of care and love for debate, and we stay within each other. If you think that you should hold us to the examples, then you should most definitely vote as our vote because the Schwenk evidence literally talks about how things like the BPP are compatible with things like the alternative, which disproves any mutual exclusivity. The arguments of how people are able to co-op certain things like the InfoWars example, you can't co-op how we're able to relate with one another. The hyper-visibility link, the negative has also done the exact same thing argument. Structural analytics is good, there's a double either they have also performed spectacularization or it's a question of structuralism and the absolute. It is not to say that intimate violence does not occur, but the two are intimately tied. The endurance is a function of broader system. It's not just ignoring people's survivability. The survivability uniqueness arguments of the Schweikart is literally flowing from this and words of permutation. The ableism causes shutdown arguments. No, not true because logistics literally creates the conditions for broken bodies in the first. When you see the appeal to be whole, in face of logistics, the problem which makes the case he decide to the alternative because it is the move to be whole is the perversion fix of policy that recreates forms of ableism within spaces like the permutation debate. Proper militancy from militancy arguments. So there's a difference between militant preservation and militancy. One is a form of love and care, the other is a violent insurrection. There's only one which is the one which is the form of the permutation debate. This definitely is Bible that was implemented by it. It's not separate because we have the one is the yes permanent method debate or also the creation of plan debates. No links are not just as the links above and it's not a part of the happy county like it's just right because it presents more from affect or rather are also question of relationality. This massive individuation is that to the alternative. The one is describes black and brown students as mutually implicated in the system of entangled logistics, but they're focused on certain textures of violence, i.e. that there is a form of gender violence, there is a form of ableist violence. This one literally seeks to individuate and prevent people from understanding how they're mutually implicated in violence. Allows why people to disavow their guilt and say that we should prefer this specific identity without understanding how they are literally involved in the process that recreates violence. The only risk of assault outweighs.
Okay, 345. You stay clear?
Yep.
They say we force them to out themselves when we've continued the weak argument which proves that they have out of themselves. That's content is not unique, a disadvantage. The second thing is to continue the impact is inevitable. The judge nevertheless to make a decision about individuals in space which are not, and which one want to be, which means that the psychological balance impact is inevitable. Third is that they continue that the alternative would let white debaters co-opt black strategies and repurpose it for racism, which is worse because it's replicates balance would also be done onto racialized subjects, which I'll do on the critique as and prove some of our black matrix argument. The pink, we're not going for the shifts as a combination. The thesis of conditionality was continued, which means contrary positions are good in the context of navigating balance. During water and technological stop cars, they've also dropped that in the 1 year. Must specifically point out which cross applications happen for the Twitter because otherwise it would be impossible for the Twitter. This framing argument was made, which means they do not take new cross applications in the Twitter. They say taking out of the performance is bad. They dropped that picks are good because they're better for the militant strategies because they're capable of recognizing real violence in their framing of us as stealing their strategies and neoliberal strategy, which replicates the violence of logistics. Critique. I will make this very, very easy for you. They have to continue to look like arguments that are not in the context of militancy weakness. Like arguments accomplishes two things. A, someone, it takes out the ability to export any energy because there's a high risk it would reproduce the same violence they criticize. So it obviously turns the case and disproves their argument that they now solves the case. B, someone, it functions as an impact turn to any square speed out of debate being the only balance in here. The Tuancy did a massive amount of work explaining our link arguments in the context of their offense and examples. Protect the tutor in this instance because the tutor will inevitably sound brand new and will have to be a lot new on a lot of these questions because we did the link work in the Tuancy and it didn't answer it in the 1 year. Any link argument should be extremely unpersuasive and now because against an that is based almost uncontestable with the impact turn militancy and their framing of the logistics, specifically analyzing how specific balance profiles particular bodies and sit inside this instance. The Harriet Tubman, Elbridge, Cleavers, and PPP example all prove black disability and block management has historically been deprioritized in the name of the race part. This moves one person risk only treatment more than automated about impact calculus will be a little difficult to resolve it here. One, the black matrix mediates the race part of the Tuancy. James Evans says that reproductive labor is the raw material for the creation of captive material. Orvin says that the block movement is a site of production of the configuration of the worldly existence. Any investment in democratic structures is only made possible through black feminized labor. You should read our James 19. It's a broad
ultimately it's the raw material that captivates, that originates captivity because it's a precondition for the structure of slavery, that the depth of time relies on the continued exploitation of the black matrix as the underbelly of democracy, which answers all the arguments, but the Atlantic because it proves that the black woman was a precondition for those forms of violence and logistics in the first place. Second is over-prioritization. You should overturn for historical deprioritization of black disability and the black matrix, which is proven by all the examples above, which means a risk of linked argument is a sufficient reason for the negative. The line by line, they say we saw big intimate violence is number one. If intimate violence is number, they don't solve. Second is that we will impact on habitality, which proves that their touching the stuff does not solve the spectacularized violence. To extend here, the one I see is undeniably complicit in the spectacularization of logistics within the public spaces like debate and on the streets. That's teams we have contextualized it to every example. The one I see the citation of tab room where teams are invited to round robins and clashes of civilizational debates as spectacular moments of black exclusion. Their arguments about racialization within debate occurred through revealing the hyper-visible moments of anti-black violence that teams like not getting invited to round robins and clashes of civilization debates or debaters getting cost on them, which is the stop and frisk logic that the impact because it crowds out the analytic of the black matrix that occurs through intimate violence in this underground, in the hotels, on debate tournaments, and through and within squadrons, which are all conceded examples and prove how they crowd out the analytic of the black matrix. They say dropping examples of black feminism proves we spectacularized violence too. When it's not about talking about violence, there's a reason James is okay with talking about racial violence, rather it's about how certain forms of violence are spectacularized within white civil society. Things like stop and frisk and white police shooting are undeniably over-prioritized, over-intimate violence. We are just have better evidence than this on this them on this question. Second is that they dropped the one argument that you started. The argument is that we've impacted your effective analysis and you have forced us into this position. Third is that both teams linked to the citing of black violence, but you link more, which was above the strike evidence and permutation. We're not going for the strike card, so it's not really relevant, nor to explain which part of the strike cards prove the permutation. So the square will be branding on this question, but the permutation proper. One, severance is voting issue makes staff and moving target that makes critical education impossible, that undermines the capacity for effective debate. Second, they've conceded the crowd out to say the only way to vote for permutation is by understanding the links as links of omission. We have impact turned this logic. Our link argument is not a link of omission, but a link of displacement. They have performed the enacted the link argument. They have conceded that when I explicitly said, quote, racial terror forms intimate violence within the system, unquote. This analytic always understands racial terror as forming intimate violence, which proves how their permutation operates through a process of overcoding the black matrix through spectacularized images of violence. They say hypervisibility, double by or it's by structuralism. We're not going for the strike evidence or the case of militancy, which means that they dropped the ball on the other link arguments. They say logistics creates a condition for violence and assertion without a warrant. I encourage you to read all of James Carter because I think they're better, and their arguments are just assertion. They say the assumption of fixing is bad. They continue when they continue, and it's inevitable to take their argument means that every decision you render is a form of fixing, which is a totally untenable model of debate. We create psychological violence against participants. Second, it links to them because they're united to the alternative. Assume that the alternative needs to be fixed. Their hapticality link extended here. The explanation of hapticality, touch, feel, and can't be separated from broader ways that their discourse informs relationship with black women in the particular and results in non-consensual and not coercive touching in the name of vibing together. That's the Spiller's evidence. Argument is not that their method will always result in intimate violence, but that their sentimentality towards one another and mutual indebtedness creates the conditions for coercive relationship that emerge from groups that organize against the race where black women's bodies become the mothers and are expected to physically care for folks. This is in line with our James arguments. They will inevitably result in the male violence upon black women. There's no discussion of what how can and can't be touched under the haptic quote, which replicates intimate violence against black women because it assumes that black women exist to further our communities, which is the James argument in the 20 overview that was not answered. The alternative, we don't need to win in the alternative debate because we have impact turned the one I see by voting negative to rethink. We should vote negative to rethink the one I see through a black feminist and disability framework. The process of tracing and revaluing the one I see is reading of logistics is a performance of the alternative that breaks down scholastic tendencies that auto default to logistics. The individuation decide the alternative explicitly solves their argument. Extend the Bailey black feminist disability framework must account for intersections of race, gender, and disability, unquote, which enters individuation because we understand violence as co-compensation. All of our arguments also prove that you have to prioritize the figure of black women in the black matrix.
Steve, how much?
228.
Yeah, sort of.
the Academy of today, black and brown students are fighting for their lives. We have no choice but to adopt military preservation. You should remember that the 2NR has conceived the solemnity mechanism of the case, being together in racial terror, a recognition of being in debt that we have for each other, create sociality through affective relations, the ability to feel through others, for others, to feel through you, for you to feeling you. Go to the critique. It's extremely problematic when the 2NR is gone for an impact turn without contesting the solemnity of mechanism of the app to resolve the impact turn. They have conceded the violence of the link arguments is just the status quo, and the alternative, according to VCOS and the 2NR, is just the rereading of that, which does not solve those things, but just impact turns the app, which means they don't have uniqueness for those impact turns in the first place. The top of the debate, you should frame, but you should flag that they got to the individuation decide with 6 seconds left. It is not enough to answer the entirety of the offense of the case debate, i.e. describing different textures of violence, to describe someone as disabled, to describe women as experiencing different forms of violence in the terms of the impact turn is bad, because it's what individuates the subject. It says that people experience different forms of violence. It says that we should be fighting for those different experiences. We should be infiltrating and framing our politics around those experiences without realizing that we are all mutually indebted to each other. They've conceded the entanglement arguments, i.e. all our violence is related to each other, and only through that frame do we allow mutual indebtedness that creates the social energy. This is a takeout to the alternative, because it proves that they don't create the agency through the tracing and mapping of these processes, but the app does, because it allows black and brown individuals to wake up the next day, to fight another day, and resolve those sort of violences of the particularities that the 2NR has gone for. They've said that it's a question of debate violence in here, but they don't have a mechanism to resolve that violence here. The tracing of those things does not resolve it, because we've identified logistics as the root cause. Here is where they lose the debate. They say the black matrix formulates the way the race wars happen. One, the app is not the race war, so good job answering the wrong one, but logistics is what controls the process of democracy in the first place. They've answered why black women lay the precondition for the world, but they've dropped the logistics lays the precondition for why black women exist in the first place, i.e. in order to capitulate black flesh, in order to abstract those bodies, to sustain the process of containerization. Bodies, objects, informations in the first place is formed on a logic of logistics. Logistics targets those broken populations, which means it creates the condition for why black women are pathologized. If we win this, it gets rid of links, because the solemnity mechanism of the app stops the violence of the logistics and solves the link argument proper. The permutation do both. You should extend it here. I will answer the specific arguments versus severance. What does the app sever out of? The movement of hapticality and the endorsement of hapticality resolves the link arguments, and because just says severance and moves on. You don't give it to them. Second is the crowd out displacement arguments, but they've conceded the entanglement, i.e. our relationship to violence is related to others, which is related to the third persons, which means that you can't go for an impact turn but concede truth level claims of why these intimate forms of violence are related in the first place. The very conception of being is understood through others' conception of being, which means that only logistics controls the way that those systems are saturated in the first place. The argument about you should overcorrect, that is a bad model, because if we win our entanglement arguments, that means overcorrecting would also flow out, because it influences those populations equivalently. Also, performance overdetermines a discursive process. Your sole priority in this debate should be the disavow of linguistic portions of this debate and focus on the performative. They have dropped, even if the 1AC is discursively instituted and model debate, we have performed militant preservation, which is what you should evaluate, because black and brown students that are enduring the system of logistics have to create social energy with the alt disavows in favor of lack of an analytic. This is a massive disadvantage to the alternative's ability to solve, because they haven't performally done the same thing as the 1AC, which means that the spectacularization of violence to say that their stop and frisk policies is Plan Plus, because it says that we have not talked about violence, but they have not drawn the threshold for what is spectacularized violence and what is not, which means that you shouldn't do it for them. Talking about examples forces the singularity of logistics, which we have impact turn. We don't crowd out discussion of black matrix, but logistics controls the direction of how hyperviscerally solves the i.e. intimate violence that happens to black women outside debate rounds is controlled by logistics, which only the app has a mechanism to resolve, because they don't resolve the very nature of being only the singularity of which they have positioned themselves to. They say every debate is fixing. It's a question of how you've positioned your politics, i.e. every debate might be a refinement of those strategies, but your idea that we are missing something, that we are incomplete, and that being a reason that it is bad or that you should vote negative is our argument, because it posits our political projects as complete, and those things being important. Rather, it shouldn't be. They've also, the hapticality link, I'll answer it now. They say it's coercive touch. One, they dropped it's a status quo, i.e. the violent touch occurs because of a process of the status quo of logistics, which containerizes bodies, but they've dropped that the entanglement means that hapticality is a negotiation of the precondition conditions of those things, and the alternative doesn't solve it anyway because they've just traced the code but not said how we should relate to each other or the net benefit to those relationalities, which means at worst the app solves the entirety of the link arguments. The permutation is functionally conceded because they just made a crowded argument without answering entanglement.